This is my first time on strike. I think for many of us, like, this is morally fraught, right? Like, we desperately want to be at the bedside taking care of our patients. That's why we chose this profession. I think for all of us, I can speak for all of us, that this is a vocation. It's not just a career. We come here and our patients become our families and our coworkers become our families. So this is like more than just a job to us.
You're listening to the Labor Notes Podcast, our weekly show on rank and file news and organizing tactics. I'm Natasha Laney-Ullman, a staff writer at Labor Notes.
And I'm Danielle Smith, an organizer at Labor Notes. That voice you heard at the top was of Sophie Boland, who is on the Nurses Bargaining Committee and is a pediatric ICU nurse at the New York Presbyterian Morgan Stanley Children's Hospital in the Washington Heights neighborhood in Manhattan. She is one of about 15,000 nurses who are now headed toward week 3 of an open-ended strike by members of the New York State Nurses Association, or NYSNA. They're striking 3 hospital systems, that is the Montefiore, Mount Sinai, and New York Presbyterian hospitals.
Yeah, and by now, you've probably also heard this being described as the largest nurses' strike in New York City in more than about 40 years. You've seen New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani and Senator Bernie Sanders show up at the picket line and call for management to come back to the table and bargain with the nurses. And there are all these Reddit threads by patients asking each other how much of a drop of quality of care they should expect right now. It is unusual to see nurses go on this kind of open-ended strike as opposed to something much shorter and more defined like 1 to 3 day walkouts. But these nurses have been pushed to the end of their rope. Danielle, you actually interviewed Sophie on the picket line last week in Washington Heights. What was it like out there, and what are the nurses' biggest demands?
Yeah, I talked to Sophie that very first morning of the strike, and the vibes were absolutely electric. It was kind of funny because I went with a friend who had never been to a picket line before, and I suggested we get there early because, mornings on the picket can be really tough. And then, of course, we arrive, and it's just like hundreds of nurses dancing in the street. So I don't think I was necessarily planning to be out there that long, but I ended up staying for hours, and it was really hard to pull myself away. I actually have a little clip from that first day with some nurses who were really jamming out, and when the nurse who was holding the speaker realized I was recording some audio, he leaned into the phone and did a little bit of a solo.
That's amazing.
I think one of the things that stood out to me hearing from nurses on the line is how devoted and committed they are to the quality of their patients' care, and also the absolutely dire conditions under which they're forced to do these high-stake jobs that demand high levels of expertise, precision, and stamina. One of the big issues that nurses are fighting for is safety, because the kind of severe violence they're exposed to, especially in emergency rooms. Sophie talked about how ER nurses would tell management at monthly meetings about the kinds of things that regularly happen to them, like being punched so hard that it knocked out their teeth, or having a telephone thrown at them by a patient frustrated by overcrowding and impossibly long wait times. So that's what I think of when I read about the hospitals calling their demands unreasonable. You could say what's actually unreasonable is to leave your workers to defend themselves from the violent consequences of staffing choices and weak security protocols that create unsafe conditions. Here's how Sophie put it.
This is energy and angst and frustration and frankly rage that has been building up over years and years and years of just being told we're working on it, we hear you, but we're working on it. When it comes to workplace violence, when it comes to safe staffing, all of those things, we bring them up continually.
Yeah, in the piece we ran this month on the NYSNA strike, listeners, we've linked it in the episode description, You and our fellow Labor Notes organizers, Luis Feliz Leon and Sarah Hughes, reported on how some of the big issues driving this strike are safe staffing, workplace violence, and of course, the scourge of pretty much all workplaces right now, AI. Could you talk a little bit about the safe staffing piece of it?
Totally. In that piece, we talked about how about 3 years ago, 7,000 nurses went out on strike at Montefiore in Mount Sinai, and they want really strong language around it. Nurses could go to arbitration over any violations over staffing ratios that they'd fought so hard to win, and the hospital would be fined for it. And it actually led to the hospitals hiring a lot more nurses. But hospitals are now trying to erode that win by asking to remove that language and saying they'll just throw in a little extra payment for short staffing instead. The whole point is that short staffing leads to stressful and unsafe conditions for nurses and patients. And it's kind of ironic, too, that when hospitals have to bring in travel nurses to help out with shortages, they sell them on great staffing ratios because that's the only way they can recruit them. From unit members' point of view, it's like, how are you able to give them safe staffing ratios, but not everyone all the time? One of the nurses quoted in the piece described having a 7-to-1 staffing ratio before the last contract. The nurse, Sunny Fatima, who is an oncology nurse at the Mount Sinai campus in East Harlem, put it this way, quote, "All I did was pass meds. I didn't really get to take care of my patients. Even when I gave chemo, it wasn't maintaining safe standards, and I'm really worried about my patients."
I was at the picket line a few days ago and was really touched by how patient care has been at the forefront throughout this fight. I've also been incredibly impressed by their very creative homemade signs. There's the one that reads, "Pay me like one of your travel nurses," a reference to the famous line in the movie Titanic. Or my personal favorite, "Think I'm going to give up easily? Wait till you hear how long I wait to pee." Danielle, what's it been like for you out on the picket line?
It's been really fantastic. I've just been swinging by before work most mornings and have really been inspired by their commitment. I mean, I wasn't wrong that mornings on the pickets do tend to actually be really hard and, sometimes the energy's a little bit lower. This week it's been like bitterly cold. But there's still been nurses out there making sure management hears them. And even on these very cold mornings, the nurses are finding ways to have fun. I remember this one day, a guy showed up with a cow costume on, and even though I'm a total milk lover, I'll be honest, I was like a little bit wary. I was kind of like, what's this guy's deal? And then he pulled out a sign that was like, "Nurses aren't your cash cows." And it was just really great. And there's also there's a woman who has a sign. It's kind of like a SpongeBob reference. And she keeps changing the day. And it's like, "Give it up for day 4, give it up for day 5." And it's just like this really beautiful sign I've loved seeing. But it is hard to stay out on strike, and it takes real fortitude to keep the picket going day after day. But I've been watching the nurses really just, sustain and build each other up each day and reminding themselves about why they're out there. And, every day you hear at the picket line, "One day longer, one day stronger." And I would really encourage anyone who's like in the New York City area, if you get a chance to go out and give them your support. They love to have people from the community come out, and it really helps keep that energy up.
Management came back to the table this week, and it looks like they'll be bargaining more regularly. What do you think it took to get them there?
Right. Well, I think a lot of that does have to do with the fact that the energy on the picket lines has been really powerful, and the nurses have stayed consistent in their message about the seriousness of their needs, including decent healthcare benefits and wage increases. And I think it's important for us to remember that while the nurses are holding the line to protect our healthcare, there are also workers who deserve fair working conditions, and we should be holding that line for them. Their contract expired December 31st, and management is still proposing something that would amount to a 1% wage increase per year, as one Mount Sinai nurse said. There's also been pressure from Zoran, who has visited the picket lines multiple times, and even New York State Governor Kathy Hochul to resume bargaining. Also, speaking of money, this is going to sound like a familiar pattern to people who just heard our Starbucks episode last week, but you can guess whose wages aren't hurting. That's right. The head of New York Presbyterian, Dr. Stephen Corwin, got a more than $26 million pay package in 2024, according to its 990 form, a public tax document for the nonprofit hospital. Nurses are also worried about how management is going to start pushing the use of artificial intelligence in a way that replaces nurses' own expertise and judgment. These nurses striking right now are the only thing standing between us and a bleak future where an AI bot tells you to just take a Tylenol and get back to work.
God, what a nightmare. I'm grateful to them for trying to keep humanity and dignity in healthcare while we still can. That's our episode. Please rate us or leave us a review on Apple or Spotify. If you're listening to us on Podbean at labornotespodcast.podbean.com, download our episode. Also, our coworker Luis Feliz Leon is on the ground in Minneapolis covering the statewide Day of Action on Friday, January 23rd, and other activity over the weekend. We'll be having him on the pod soon to talk about it. In the meantime, follow Labor Notes on Blue Sky, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter to keep up with the regular updates and Luis's coverage. You can find our social accounts at linktr.ee/labornotes.org. We've also linked that in the episode description.
Coming up next, we have our February Stewards Workshop on Thinking Like an Organizer on Wednesday, February 18th from 8 to 9:30 p.m. Our Stewards Workshop after that in March will be on the topic of investigating grievances on Monday, March 16th from 8 to 9:30 p.m. Our next Secrets of a Successful Organizer series will be in March and on Wednesdays, March 4th, 11th, and 18th. This is our core organizing workshop, and we do these roughly every 3 months, so don't miss it. And finally, at least for now, our next session of What to Do When Your Union Breaks Your Heart will be on Tuesday, March 17th.
The Labor Notes podcast is produced by Daniel Smith, Sindhu Sundar, and myself. Our title music was written and performed by our coworker, Keith Brower Brown. See you next week. Solidarity, y'all.